Welcome to the Canny Conversations Podcast. Conversations with a cause with social entrepreneur Safaraz Ali.
Hello, and it's time again to captivate your curiosity cannily. Yes, it's Canny Conversations back again. And we've got a troublemaker with us today, haven't we, Saf?
We have, absolutely. He's such a brilliant guest.
He's caused us a lot of trouble, and I'll tell you why he's caused us a lot of trouble. A previous podcast we did was with Tony Adams, the broadcaster and a journalist. Yes. And, you know, we've had so much feedback, haven't we, Saf?
Absolutely.
So many people think, well, you know, there are so many further questions that we're going to have to cover some of those off in this podcast. But before we do that, there's another topic that we want to talk about fairly briefly, but we'll give it a fair hearing. And that's to talk about something which in the old days broadcasters would have seen covered by people they used to call industrial relations correspondents. That's a term, Tony, isn't it? We haven't heard for some time.
It's not something you hear these days, is it? It's almost a bygone era.
It's a flashback to the past. But we're going to talk very briefly initially about this relationship between workers and bosses. Perhaps there isn't a distinction anymore. Everybody seems to be a colleague these days. Well, you know, whoever they work for, there's no more workers and bosses. Saf is obviously a businessman, an employer. Tony has, and I think may still be a trade union representative.
Absolutely.
So I don't want to present this as a us and them because I don't think it is. But Saf, you're a young man, but you've got enough years under the belt to have seen how things have perhaps changed. Just give us a feel of how the landscape has changed in terms of, to use an old-fashioned phrase, industrial relations.
Thank you, Adrian. I mean, I've not been called a young man for a long while, but thank you for that. You're absolutely right. The landscape is different. Landscape has changed, and it's a lot of the changes are the consequences of the economy. In some aspects of it, in terms of the international economy, the local economy, and how that shift has happened. There's fewer larger companies. There's fewer. There's obviously less and less number of members who join up to be part of trade unions, and we've gone away from being a lifelong sort of career anymore. So, no longer the job for life. People are transient. They're moving from one job to another. They sometimes upskilling, reskilling, changing jobs. You know, sometimes you're a broadcaster maybe for 2 years or 3 years, and then you may have a change, and you might decide, you know, I want to do something myself, or I want to do something different. And we've got a lot more choice. We've got, you know, it's easier to move around. It's easier to move companies as well. And I think people are no longer boxed in to say, you know, I'm this particular profession and I'm going to be that profession for life. There's less and less of that. You know, we still have it to a certain level. I've seen people who are sort of teachers and have been teachers for life. But what I'm finding is that their career spans are traditionally, less years now, 2, 3, 4 years. People tend to move from one company to another, even in some cases moving completely, as I said, in terms of a completely different field. So definitely landscape has changed. But what you've got is more SME businesses now. So more people working for the smaller business. More people now work for smaller businesses than they do larger businesses. And smaller businesses has a bigger role in the economy, and predominantly that is different skill sets as well. So yeah, definitely landscape has changed. And
would you agree, Tony, that the landscape has changed a lot, and that as someone who, you know, is a supporter of trade unions, how well do you think the trade union movement has adapted to the change?
Yeah, that's interesting, Adrian. As chair of the National Union of Journalists, the Birmingham Commentary Branch, 700 I think colleagues in this sector. Look, I'm a trade unionist activist, something I always have been. But let's just backtrack a little bit. Of course, the era of Thatcher and the way she quashed the movement. Of course, with the miners' strike, which isn't. It's a distant memory, but incidentally, it'll be June this year. It'll be the 50-year celebration of the Coke Works in Saltley, where masses of thousands of people came to protest and, of course, show solidarity for the workers. So the trade unionism is massive. It's huge, of course, from my perspective. It's there to protect the workers' rights, and that's really what it's about, because things do go wrong in the workplace, and it's for the union to step in and make sure they're actually there for the worker, for him or her, and making sure they get the best deal.
Saf, would you entirely agree that Mrs. Thatcher destroyed the unions? I mean, let's talk specifically about what Tony was alluding to, the miners' strike. Was it Mrs. Thatcher that destroyed the NUM, or was it the fact that, you know, coal was an old-fashioned fossil fuel that got replaced by cleaner and cheaper fuel? So was it a consequence more of the way the world is changing rather than any government policy, do you think?
I think there was a shift anyway in terms of moving away from big government to a smaller government. So I think the economy was struggling in terms of tax take. You know, less and less people contributing, more unemployed. You know, we had streets of unemployment. You know, the job centres were busier than ever. We also had, to a certain extent, clashes of personalities, and sometimes it's the middle where the answer is. It's not one way or the other. It's a centre where the answer is, and sometimes you can go too far out. And from my perspective, it became a personality and a positioning. And sometimes, yes, you know, there's a shift in movement. Yes, there's an economy, world economy changing, power was changing. You know, I went to school where, you know, we often didn't have heating. We often didn't have. We were sent home, and we missed, you know, many. I mean, at the time we loved it, really. I mean, at the time we loved it, but we missed out on we missed out on our education. My father was a member of a trade union. In my early days, I was a member of a trade union myself. Partly because there was an element of they're our go-to, they're the ones who are protecting us, and it's a them and us culture. I think it's less and less of them and us culture now, should be, hopefully, and we, you know, we've changed, and it's been, you know, and it's only because we've had that time that we've lived out. We've experienced it. We can understand the power of a union, power of collective people getting together. Younger generation these days don't understand it. They don't understand why they would pay their subscription, what the benefit is, and they're thinking, you know, there's no benefit to that.
Tony, we've agreed, I think, that there has been a change in landscape, and I think we've agreed that there's a change in the balance of power, perhaps from a situation 40, 50 years ago when, you know, some people might have said that unions were too powerful. But do you feel that balance has changed too far and has left too many people vulnerable? Let's talk, both of you, Saf and Tony, about the gig economy, for example. One view of the gig economy is that it gives people flexibility. It enables them to fit their working life around their or the other factors, you know, the family and what they want to do in the leisure time. And the alternative view of the gig economy is that it leaves huge numbers of people vulnerable to low wages, poor conditions, high levels of insecurity. So, Tony, it's moved too far, hasn't it?
Well, let's be very clear, Adrian. When we talk about the gig economy, we're talking about zero-hour contracts, aren't we? And that really is at the helm of most of the contracts on the gig economy. There's just so much uncertainty, as we all know. We've just gone through COVID. We've seen the furlough scheme come through as well. Some people have benefited. Most people haven't, for whatever reason, because of the compliance and the governance at certain companies or certain corporations that wasn't already set up there. So you've got what I would call the working class man almost at the beck and call of the big corporations, and his or her rights almost been quashed.
Do you agree, Seth?
I think you've also got another perspective, which is people have got a choice. And, you know, we've got many more contractors out there who've gone into setting up personal service companies, contracting now, having a lifestyle type business. So it depends on the skill set. So if you've got a higher skill set, if you're in a position where you can actually sell your services in a way, you can package it as a company, you've got more choice. Tony, you're at a position where you can potentially work for 4 or 5 different employers, different organizations, work from one stage, or you can do your own thing as well. And you've got that choice because you are, you've got the knowledge, you've got the experience, you've got the skill sets. But somebody at a lower down in terms of, if it's more manual work or labor work, they have less choice. So in some aspects of it, the gig economy works because that is about choice. That is about a lifestyle business, and people who are, in terms of IT contractors, a lot of them are contractors. They're selling their services per day, per hour, or per job. And it's, as I think what we're talking about in terms of the gig economy, we automatically think the 0-hour contracts. We automatically think the individual that's working for the large distribution house, the retailers, those sort of organizations, the care sector, is another one which is all about 0 hours.
Yeah, absolutely, Saf. I mean, it's an interesting area, isn't it? The care workers, and over a number of years, we've seen this in Birmingham, haven't we? Fighting for their rights, a minimum wage, making sure they're recognised for their services. But let's also go back, and I come back to COVID. 2 years, even in the broadcasting sector, many journalists and many broadcasters having to work from home, so having the studio set up, etc., making sure that's being done there, and almost now to a stage where a lot of people have got used to working from home. So Mrs. Smith with school children going to school, it's become almost a lifestyle in itself. But, and now, of course, being called back to the office. Well, there is no office because we've let a lot of people go. So it's been a double-edged sword as far as I'm concerned.
When you spoke a few minutes ago, Tony, you talked about the gig economy in terms of 0 hours contracts. But of course, it's more than that, isn't it? And let's bring ourselves a little bit back to your world and my world, which is journalism and broadcasting. A lot of journalists are freelancers.
Absolutely, and I can honestly say within the NUJ union, I think 85% of our members are actually freelance. You're absolutely right.
So bringing us back to that topic and picking up on some of the things that our listeners have been talking about and raising with us. And I want to come back to the issue that we kind of finished with last time, which was trust. Saf, we get our information from all sorts of different sources these days, a lot of it from social media. Do you trust the information that you get from social media?
Yeah, I think we could talk about this topic for a while, and I think to put everything into social media or as in bad, I think that's not something that I agree with. I use social media for my information. Twitter is a particular tool that I tend to use, and it's moved away in terms of even how it describes itself from being a social media tool to a news tool. There's a lot more debate, there's conversation, there's viewpoints that you have. Some viewpoints that you disagree with, some you agree with, some you sort of probably would, meet in the middle to a certain level, and that's how I would see social media. For example, today I found out in terms of the MP for our local area, Erdington MP, I found out first on social media that happened rather than the news. So, it depends on the source of the information rather than the channel itself often. So, where's that source coming from as opposed to maybe a person or, so forth. We also know there's a lot of content out there which is paid promotions. We also know there's a lot of content out there which is particularly the authority may not be there. We've got people who are positioning themselves to be the first as opposed to be right, and it's that chase to be the first that sometimes what is me, that's necessarily not the the best news or the right news.
I think we're weaving two topics together, and I think that's what we want to try to do. On this business, Tony, you're a member of the National Union of Journalists.
I am.
And so am I.
I'm your boss.
I'm a member of the National Union of Journalists. And as a member of the National Union of Journalists, as we know, there is a certain code of conduct that we have to follow in terms of the way that we behave with people, in the way that we report things. There's a lot of people out there who call themselves journalists, but they're no more journalists than I'm a plumber. Does that enrage you that there are people who are pretending to be professional journalists, but they've got no training, they've got no qualification, they've probably not studied the law, they've probably not studied things like how you properly report things? And doesn't it annoy you, Saf, as well, as a consumer, that there's nothing, when you pick up a piece from social media, there's nothing that says on there, actually, this is my opinion, and I'm the bloke down the pub, and I'm presenting something which could be terribly damaging as fact, but it's actually just my opinion. Both of you, aren't you enraged that you can't really trust a lot of what news you consume these days?
I think you've hit the nail on the head, Adrian. As somebody who's been in the industry for 35 years and learning my craft at the BBC, I think the de facto was shorthand and then learning libel law. If you had those two under your belt and you could do shorthand, I don't know, 110 words per minute, whatever it was then, or 80 words per minute, that was standard. You know, you could go to court, you could report. We didn't have dictating machines. We had a notepad and a pencil. And we actually put the record straight, exactly how it was. I think we're in an era now of what we call citizen journalists. All very well, but do they actually have the right credentials? We know, Adrian, as we both know, print media has been decimated over the last decade. We don't actually have many papers now. So what we have is these so-called citizen journalists going out into the community and snapping away, where a photographer, a NUJ trained photographer, somebody who's trained in the craft, would get a certain amount of money. But these chaps and lassies will just send their feed or picture absolutely free of charge, just for them to get more numbers or subscription on their social media. It actually aggrieves me, to be honest. It really does. And it's dangerous, I think, because we come back to the same question, don't we? Trust. Who would you trust? Somebody who's got the proper accreditation and the qualifications and has the industry backing. Somebody who adheres to the NUJ, for example, the 10-point code of conduct, which is very, very strict. It's very, very heavily regulated. Yeah. No.
Saf, as a consumer, I mean, you're consuming information from citizen journalists, but would you be happy to consult a citizen doctor or a citizen lawyer? What's your feeling about this? Are we getting a little bit too hot under the collar about it, or not?
I think obviously I've got a present company. Both of you are friends, and both of you are journalists and broadcasters, and I've got a lot of respect and admiration for both of you. I think there's an element of elitism that comes in. From my perspective, just because somebody can do shorthand doesn't necessarily mean they're a journalist. And again, Tony, I'm going to have to disagree with you with love, if I may. Okay. Where, from my perspective, it's about what insight that brings in. Yes, sometimes you can tell whether it's regurgitation of news. You can tell sometimes it's fairly biased in terms of the viewpoint, and sometimes you can pick that up. Not everybody can. So definitely the fact that if there's a kite mark and if there's some sort of code of practice or a code of standard that people are adhering to, fantastic. In terms of the sector that I belong to, the two sectors, we've got, in terms of education and particularly the skill sector, anybody can become a consultant per se. From that perspective, somebody can say, I'm a consultant, I can help you grow your business. And we've had that for SMEs, we've had that in our sector. We can get you this, we can get you that, and so forth. There's no standard there as such. And, and that quality mark isn't there. In terms of going back to the radios or going back to community, Facebook, everybody, it is, everybody can set up a media channel now. It's so easy to create your own YouTube channel. It's so easy to create, to do a podcast like we're doing and get your news out there, get your views out there. But hopefully the consumer in most cases, will be able to differentiate between what a viewpoint is, what a commentary is, and to what real journalism is, which is hopefully unbiased and has got some element of breaks on there or safeguards on there to make sure the fact that it's informative and gives you a perspective.
Tony, do you think that people can differentiate? Because I'm not sure they can. How many people have died as a consequence of postings and information about COVID and, the anti-vax brigade and all the rest of it? I mean, how many, when you're talking about an opinion, everybody's entitled to an opinion. Are Liverpool a better football team than Manchester United or whatever? But when you're talking about issues that affect life and death, don't we need to have some sort of regulation? Don't we need to have the platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and all the rest of it? Shouldn't they be regulated in the same way that a newspaper or a radio station or a television station is regulated, insofar as the platform is responsible for the content?
That's interesting, isn't it? Because we do know in the UK for the print media, we've got Impress and Ipso, two regulators independently that print media need to adhere to. In terms of broadcasting, of course, again, I come back to Ofcom and the regulator, and sometimes I think with podcasts, it's always nice when you're sitting with somebody who has an opposing view, and I think I've got to agree to disagree, because when we're talking about journalism, we're actually talking about news gathering, aren't we? We're talking about getting the information from a source, making sure, evaluating. As a journalist, we have certain skill sets. We have to evaluate where we shouldn't, and of course we come back to the code of conduct. There's no news is good news. There's bad news is always, it is what it is. But there's a danger of sensationalising bad news, and I think that's where it comes a little bit grey, a little bit tricky. So does a citizen journalist actually have all those skill sets? I don't think he or she does. What does a genuine, qualified broadcaster journalist have? Well, they have those main core areas, which is learning libel law, libel, defamation, slander. You ask any citizen journalist, does he or she know what that is and how it's implied and what the implications are? I can tell you, I don't think they do. And then, of course, coming back onto broadcasting, we're, again, very, very heavily regulated. And you know this as much as myself, Adrian, many a film, and I know Etonians and guys have come out from Cambridge, great CV, but you know what they didn't have on their CV? Was shorthand, and that CV went straight in the bin. It's the de facto, it is the kite mark. You can have everything else and nothing else, but if you've got shorthand on your CV, you're going to get that gig.
Saf, talking from your perspective now, you're in the education sector, and you're in the the domiciliary care sector. How well do you feel that those sectors are regulated?
I mean, there is regulation in terms of if you're a provider. So if you're a training provider, if you're a delivery provider, there's definitely regulation out there. But if you're a consultant, what I was referring to is people who go and provide a service to others. Anybody can become a consultant. Any can become an expert. Or just go out there and say, I've got expertise and I can help you do this. That's the element of that I was referring to. But if I go back to the points that Tony has mentioned, there's a fair amount that I do agree with. From my perspective, this benchmark of shorthand, Pitman shorthand, I tried to learn that many years ago myself, and I thought to myself, is that really the standard for now? If I look at say TikTok or Instagram, you've got people out there who are giving out news. Definitely, you can see, I wouldn't rely on that news. Somebody going out there and saying, well, at the moment, we're all talking about East European and Russia and so forth. People out there saying, well, actually, it's the Prime Minister of Pakistan who caused it. He went to see Putin, and and all of these sort of things have happened. Going back to again, the whole COVID situation. TikTok was, I would say, stay away from that. It's entertainment, it's not news. It's not there to do so. At the same time, for certain things, TikTok could be fantastic for how do you go about doing this? How could you, so there's short, sharp learnings, 30 seconds in a minute, you can learn something. That's different from getting it from your news. How do you fix your tie? How do you do this? How do you do that? Are you aware of this? A little bit of entertainment here, a little bit of dance here. Fantastic. That's what that medium's for. But if you go and listen to somebody and he starts talking about, financial advice, or, you should extract your money from your pension, or, you can go and buy you can remortgage your house and, go and get 10 properties and all this sort of stuff, then stay away from that. Go to a reliable source, professional people, financial advisors, or whoever it is, and hopefully people have some element of common sense to be able to differentiate that. And that's where that's the point that I'm trying to make here.
Yeah, you raise a very good point about financial services. Tony, you were going to say something.
Yeah, it's interesting as a journalist. Twitter seems to be the de facto platform for broadcasters and journalists here in the UK, rightly or wrongly. I've come back on Facebook after 12 years. I was in the oblivion. Nothing's really changed as far as I'm concerned. It's definitely not a news portal. It's not something I would actually trust. But then I'm being biased because I've got my own views based around that. TikTok, yeah, it's a new phenomenon. It's a platform. Selling services, so it's almost an advertorial platform, isn't it? YouTube. We have so many social media platforms now. We are sport for choice, but it's the individual. Where do they go to get their information? Is it going to be terrestrial TV? Is it going to be satellite TV? Is it going to be hard, tangible press media? Or is it going to be one of these platforms? But again, I think we come back to the same adage, and the question is, you are sport for choice, and you make your own choices, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Isn't it, Saf, one of the problems with social media that it kind of creates an echo chamber? But by that I mean, if you Google or search, just for the sake of argument, why vaccines are wrong. If you search and that, then the algorithms will mean that those are the sort of stories that you will constantly see, so that they actually funnel people down into a particular point of view on any subject, and they tend to basically be forced to consume information that essentially supports a particular view and reinforces something. And I know something that we've talked about in previous podcasts has been this business of, where you're actually reinforcing a particular view, a particular prejudice. Isn't that a problem? Yes or no?
Yeah, I mean, you've. I think it's not a yes or no.
Confirmation bias is the word.
It's not necessarily a yes or no, but you are right. Sometimes you look for things that validate your opinion, your viewpoint, and you look for that evidence. And there's, I think, less and less people who are completely open-minded to say, I'm going to go into a conversation because I'm open to the conversation. So if I said to Tony, you and I will have a conversation about journalism, but you've got to be able to say, change your mind on this. And most people wouldn't do that. So if I was going into a conversation to talk about religion, and somebody said to me, "You come into this conversation and be open to change your religion or change your view," I wouldn't do that, because that's my faith. That's a bit too important for me. So I think we need to be able to say, these views are interested in me. This is what I believe. This is not I'm here to necessarily give you a point. I'm not here to persuade you, but or to get you to change your mind. But I am here for you to listen and understand what my viewpoint is, and getting that balance right. And it's sometimes we have that position where we're trying to win over, and we're trying to have the last word on every single aspect of it. And I think we need to be able to understand each other and be able to work with each other without really offending, and don't take offense personally, but don't necessarily go out there and offend others. And I think that's where that ground is for me.
To close it out, and obviously your expertise is extremely valuable on this particular issue, Tony. We're podcasting. And we hope that people enjoy the podcast, and that if they do, they'll tell us that they like us and that they will subscribe. But to finish off, a lot of people are podcasting. There's an awful lot of it about at the moment of different quality levels of quality. I just wonder, both of you, how do you measure whether a podcast that you've been involved in is good or not? I'll tell you what my test is. I call it the Radio 4 test. And I'm not saying that we always reach it. We do our best with this wonderful series with Safaraz. I'm not biased, of course. But I use the Radio 4 test. I listen to a broadcast and I say, is this something that Radio 4 might be prepared to broadcast? That's my simple test. What's your test of a good podcast, Tony?
It's interesting, isn't it? And if we look at podcasting over the years, I think it's 10 years or so in the UK. So it's not a new phenomenon. But what we do have, gentlemen, is again choices. So, for example, we in the previous podcast we were talking about different radio stations providing different services, different programming. Well, let's talk about a station, for example, a local station that has a large Palestinian community, for example, and the atrocities, for example, in the Middle East. Where do he or she go? Well, there's a niche market, isn't there? There's somebody providing that particular medium where he and she can listen to, and that's more reflective of their beliefs. For example, on mainstream radio, certainly community radio stations here in the UK. To talk about Kashmir, for example, it's a no-no. I mean, even local community stations, they won't be allowed because the regulation is so stiff and harsh. They have to be very careful. And I've seen many citizen journalists and broadcasters, unfortunately, who have gone down that slippery road because they haven't done their due diligence. They haven't checked the sources. But look, podcast it's great. You can be in the shower, you can be walking in business, you could be in the tube, and you listen to something that you want. It's so tailor-made.
Saf, you say you came to entrepreneurship late. I'm not sure that might be true, but it also means that you had a lot of experience to bring to that role. You've also said that you came to podcasting fairly late. Why did you feel that podcasting was something you wanted to do?
I fully agree with Tony in terms of it's it's been here a decade plus. There's and again, what you find is it seems like at the moment everybody's jumping on the bandwagon. And when I thought of the idea, I thought, you know what, people are going to say, here's another one just jumping on the bandwagon. Why is he doing this? What's the purpose? And for me, I only went into it firstly on the basis that am I going to be able to add value to what I currently do? Am I going to add value to the listener? Is this something that I will enjoy as well? And is this something that is going to give me an element of growth and development personally? And then really understanding how does that fit into the ecosystem? So I was probably challenging myself more in terms of I don't want to just do this because everybody else is doing it. It sounds like a good thing to do. So, we've maintained it. We're on our series 3 now. We've changed in terms of our style of how we do things. It used to be you and I having a conversation, and now we're bringing in professionals. We're bringing in people who've got expertise, and really having a conversational conversation, which is what this Canny Conversations is about. But it is about the cause itself. It's about hopefully adding value to the listener. It's also really, from my perspective, going out and talking about topics in a manner that really opens my mind, but also at the same time, hopefully, for the listener, they're getting something out of it. And if I can't do that, then I might as well go home and leave it. And that's, for me, that's the test. Am I adding value to that, or to the audience that we've got?
We've had a tremendous half hour. It would be remiss not to thank Tony for his contribution.
You're welcome.
And it would be remiss also not to remind our listeners that at least at the time that this podcast was made, Tony is on the radio daily.
Monday to Friday between 3 and 6.
Radio XL, drive time programme. Saf, any final comments to Tony?
Tony, thank you again for all your support. I do, obviously, respect and admire in terms of what you're doing. You're a long-time friend, although you've been out in the wilderness for 12 years on Facebook, but you're still a very close associate, and we've been in contact for that year. And I really appreciate all the wisdom knowledge that you've contributed to this program and the last program as well.
And can I just add to that? It is a little bit uncanny when you see, or certainly when you're confronting a CEO of a big group of companies. And I think that's also key, isn't it, Saf? As a CEO of the Pathway Group, I think this podcast is so reminiscent of what you're providing. And I think when people, not only visually watching, but certainly listening, they're saying, well, actually, you know what? This chap has actually taken his time and he's actually talking to me. And that resonates. Where many of CEOs, I'm sure you've had the same, Adrian, you get them into a radio studio or a broadcast studio, and many have actually quibbled at the being in front of a microphone or a TV camera. So
there's a saying, isn't there? Get out while you're winning, and we can't do much better than that. But I'm sure it's true. We're going to now curtail this canny conversation with a cause. We hope that you have enjoyed listening. We hope that you'll give us any feedback. We certainly had a lot of feedback for the first broadcast, which featured Tony. And we hope you stay safe until the next time. Bye-bye.